London, February 1963. The coldest winter England has endured in 2 centuries. Outside, the streets glisten with a thin, grey sheen of ice and snow, while sodium lamps cast tired halos on the slick cobblestones. The fog presses against the windows like a curious ghost, damp and relentless. In a narrow flat on Fitzroy Road, where Yeats once lived, a detail that would have pleased her, the pipes are frozen solid, and the air smells of coal smoke and unwashed wool. Inside, the only light comes from the faint blue hiss of a gas heater and the stark white page resting on a desk. It is 4 a.m, that sacred, terrible hour when the veil between genius and madness grows thin. A young woman sits there, wearing a robe to ward off the chill that seeps through the brickwork. She is writing. The scratching of her pen is the only sound in the universe. She is crafting Ariel, turning her agony into diamonds, burning her pain so that it might warm the future. You, lying there in your own darkness tonight, know something of what she felt. Perhaps not the totality of her despair, but fragments of it. The weight of consciousness that refuses to quiet itself. The exhaustion of performing normalcy when your interior world crumbles like ancient architecture. You feel the pressure of expectations, the tyranny of potential, the strange conviction that you are both too much and not enough. Tonight, we do not sensationalize her death or romanticize her agony. Instead, we walk gently through the corridors of her haunted intelligence, guided by her poetry, her letters, her luminous darkness. Not to glorify despair, but to name it, understand it, and transform it into something that can cradle you towards sleep rather than drag you toward the edge. To understand Sylvia Plath, you must first step softly into the formidable, luminous architecture of a mind that was never designed for rest. Picture, if you will, a house at night where every window blazes with light, every room awake, no door fully closed. This was Sylvia's interior world from the moment she could hold a pen. Born on October 27, 1932, in Massachusetts to Otto Plath, a professor of biology who studied bees, and Ariel, a teacher who sacrificed her own ambitions, Sylvia learned before she could properly articulate the lesson that her worth was measured not in her being, but in her becoming. You, who lie awake tonight, counting unfinished tasks and unfulfilled promises, may recognize this atmosphere, loving perhaps, but dense with expectation. In her early journals, written when she was barely 11, Sylvia assesses herself with the cold precision of a professor grading an examination. She measures each day by output. How many pages? How many accomplishments? How much closer to the imagined pinnacle of perfection? This is the architecture of brilliance. Rooms built from expectation, walls constructed from the need to prove, foundations poured from the concrete belief that love must be earned through excellence. You might know this blueprint intimately, the invisible contract that says you must always do more, be more, understand more, or risk evaporating into insignificance. Plath's schooling rewarded her beautifully and poisoned her subtly. Scholarships, prizes, publications, each triumph confirmed that the world loved her brightness, not yet noticing the burn marks on the inside. The same neural pathways that allowed her to weave moonlight into metaphors also amplified every slight, every failure, every absence of praise, until they echoed through the chambers of her consciousness like screams in a cathedral. Perhaps your own nervous system works this way. Small criticisms lodge in you like splinters, while compliments evaporate almost before you can feel them. This is the curse of the gifted, intellectual brilliance wrapped in psychological vulnerability. The sensitive consciousness that perceives subtle patterns and makes creative connections others miss is the same consciousness that becomes overwhelmed by stimulation, that cannot easily dismiss criticism, that experiences rejection as existential threat rather than temporary setback. Plath's mind resembled a library whose lights are never turned off. Shelves upon shelves of reference, memory, and metaphor, all available, all glowing, all insisting on being consulted. A magnificent resource, certainly, but also an exhausting one. How can the body rest when the archive is forever open? Her journals reveal an internal tribunal that never adjourns. A committee of imagined critics seated permanently in the balcony of her mind, scrutinizing each gesture she makes. You may know that committee well. It interrupts you when you try to rest, revisiting stumbles from years ago as if they were happening tonight. The tyranny of potential whispers that if you can do something, you must do it. It tells you that rest is moral failing, that silence is wasted time, that your value is calculated by your output. This is the tax levied on the intelligent mind, the relentless self-interrogation that demands you justify your existence every single day. But tonight we dismantle this architecture. We acknowledge that Sylvia's tragedy was her inability to accept the quiet stillness of simply being. You are not a machine built for endless production. You are a biological entity, soft and ephemeral, requiring the mercy of sleep. The world has demanded your brilliance all day. It does not need it now. You are allowed to be dull, unproductive, ordinary. In this darkness, you need not be a genius. You only need to be here, breathing, safe in the knowledge that your worth exists even in silence, even in the blessed dimming of all those lights. Otto Plath died on November 5, 1940, when Sylvia was 8 years old, an age when a father is still the architecture of the universe, when his voice is the law of physics and his presence the very gravity that holds your world together. He died from complications of diabetes, a condition he refused to treat because he mistakenly believed he had lung cancer. This detail haunted Sylvia for the rest of her life. Her father chose death through willful ignorance, through pride, through the stubborn refusal to seek help. You, who carry complicated feelings about those who abandoned you through death or emotional unavailability, will understand how this choice tormented her. The terrible suspicion that he could have stayed but didn't, that she wasn't reason enough for him to fight. When Otto vanished into the earth of Winthrop, Massachusetts, he did not simply disappear. He expanded. He became mythology. To a child, a father is not merely a person. He is the sky, the law, the weather itself. After his death, Sylvia made a vow recorded in her journals. She would never speak to God again. Not because God took her father, but because her father had been God, and gods are not supposed to die. This is how the father wound operates. The absent parent becomes enormous, precisely because they are missing. You may know this phenomenon intimately, how an empty chair grows larger than any occupied one. How silence speaks louder than words ever did. Sylvia spent the next 22 years trying to resurrect Otto through language, through relationships, through the alchemy of poetry. Ted Hughes, whom she would marry, was tall like Otto, intellectual like Otto, authoritative like Otto. She was not seeking a husband, she was conducting a séance. You who find yourself recreating familiar patterns of abandonment in adult relationships will recognize this compulsion, the psyche's desperate attempt to master trauma through repetition, staging the same play with different actors, hoping this time the ending will change. In her most infamous poem, Daddy, she finally confronts this towering shadow. She transforms him into a Nazi, herself into a Jew, using the imagery of historical trauma to articulate private pain. The literal facts are inaccurate, but the psychological truth is devastating. When a child is frightened or abandoned, the mind often magnifies the parent into something mythic, because it is easier to hate or worship a god than to accept that a flawed human failed to love you adequately. She writes, "Daddy, I have had to kill you, because you cannot mourn what you have made mythological. You cannot grieve a god, you can only dethrone him."
Modern attachment theory explains what Sylvia intuited through poetry. Early loss programs the nervous system for hypervigilance and fear. When a primary caregiver disappears, the child's brain concludes that love is fundamentally unreliable, that attachment is dangerous. You carry this programming in your body, perhaps as anxiety when someone doesn't respond immediately, as the conviction that happiness is temporary, as the exhausting need to control outcomes, because the universe proved itself untrustworthy when you were too young to defend yourself.
But tonight we release Otto Plath from his mythological prison. We allow him to be simply a man who died, not a god who judged you unworthy. As you sink deeper into the comfort of your bed, imagine that heavy statue, the expectation of the perfect parent, the judgment of the ancestor, beginning to crack. Not exploding, but simply crumbling, turning to dust, blowing away in a soft wind. The colossus has fallen, not with a crash, but with a sigh. You are no longer required to carry their legacy of pain. The horizon is clear now. There is only you, safe in the quiet, released from the duty of resurrection, free to rest. In the suffocating summer of 1953, when the air in Massachusetts hung thick and motionless, Sylvia Plath felt something inside her quietly seal shut. She had just returned from New York City, from a coveted guest editorship at Mademoiselle magazine, surrounded by the glittering prizes she was supposed to want. From the outside, her life appeared luminous: academic triumphs, literary recognition. A future bright enough to dazzle anyone looking from a safe distance. Yet brilliance, when turned inward, becomes interrogation. And interrogation, prolonged, becomes torture. The questions arrived faster than any answer could. Who am I without achievement? What remains if I stop performing excellence? This is the terrifying paradox of the high-functioning depressive. And you who have smiled through your own despair while the world assumed you were thriving, will understand the particular loneliness of drowning in plain sight. Depression, for Sylvia, was not ordinary sadness. Sadness implies connection to the world, a reaction to it. Instead, it was the absence of feeling altogether, the draining of colour until even joy looked like a rumour from another planet. She described it as being trapped under a bell jar, preserved yet inaccessible, visible to the world but separated from it by invisible airtight glass. You may recognize this soundless suffocation. Under the bell jar, you go through motions, answer messages, attend obligations, yet everything feels like a poorly rehearsed imitation of being alive. Outside the jar, life moves, laughs, makes plans. Inside, the air grows stale, and every breath feels like an obligation. Colors fade to grey. Food loses taste. The things that once brought pleasure inspire only dull, exhausted indifference. When rejection from a writing course shattered her carefully constructed future, Sylvia made her methodical retreat. She crawled into the darkness beneath her mother's house, swallowed 40 sleeping pills, and waited for the ultimate quiet. She was not reaching for drama, but for silence, seeking the only place that matched her internal darkness. Discovered after 3 days, she was subjected to the brutal psychiatric machinery of the 1950s. Electroconvulsive therapy administered without anesthesia, without muscle relaxants, without mercy. Her pain was catalogued, not comprehended. Mental illness, particularly in women, was pathologized as hysteria, as weakness requiring masculine correction. You inherit a more compassionate world now. Medications with fewer side effects. Therapy approaches emphasizing collaboration rather than authority. Yet the fundamental experience remains unchanged across decades. You may swallow antidepressants in the morning and still feel like a museum exhibit behind glass by evening. The world encourages you to reach out, practice gratitude, as if depression were fixable through attitude adjustments. But Sylvia's metaphor honors the reality. Depression is atmospheric change, not character flaw. But tonight, we reframe this glass prison. In the biology of the mind, depression often functions as forced hibernation, a desperate attempt by the nervous system to conserve energy when the cost of living becomes too high. Sometimes the bell jar is not only prison, but protection, a necessary retreat when the world becomes too sharp, too demanding. You who feel the need to withdraw, to disappear into your room and close the curtains, are not failing. You are listening to ancient survival wisdom. As you lie in merciful darkness now, we transform the descending glass. Imagine the bell jar settling over you not as suffocation, but as sanctuary. It shields you from tomorrow's demands, yesterday's judgments, the present's noise. The air inside grows still. The world outside, emails, obligations, expectations, cannot reach you here. Let the glass mute street sounds blur worries' sharp edges until they become vague shapes in the distance. You are preserved in absolute stillness, allowed to hibernate, to breathe your own quiet air. The bell jar that once trapped now protects. Sleep is the small death that makes living possible. Surrender to it completely. In October 1962, as London's autumn nights grew long and merciless, Sylvia Plath sat at her small writing table in the pre-dawn darkness and conjured something unprecedented. A poem that transformed her most shameful moment into her most defiant declaration. Lady Lazarus emerged from her pen like a phoenix birthed from ash, a theatrical resurrection that refused to apologize for its own survival. This was not confession but performance, not plea but proclamation. Dying is an art like everything else. I do it exceptionally well. You who have walked close to the edge in your darkest hours, who have imagined disappearance not as melodrama but as blessed relief, will recognize the strange, terrible authority in her voice. She is not the pathetic girl discovered unconscious beneath her mother's porch 10 years earlier. She has become something far more dangerous. A woman who has visited death's country and returned fluent in its language, carrying its secrets like credentials. There is a particular expertise that belongs only to survivors, a knowledge earned through proximity to the abyss that cannot be taught in any classroom or acquired through any degree. Plath understood intuitively what modern psychology now calls post-traumatic growth, the paradoxical expansion that can emerge from profound suffering. You may have experienced this yourself, how the worst thing that happened to you also cracked you open, allowed light into previously sealed chambers of your consciousness, taught you compassion you couldn't have learned through comfort alone. But her resurrection is not the sanitized version our culture prefers. It is not gentle healing or graceful recovery. It is violent reconstruction, the self reforged in fire rather than simply repaired. The poem's genius lies in its reclamation of narrative control. She transforms herself from victim into ringmaster, from specimen into spectacle. The peanut-crunching crowd that gathers to witness her pain becomes her audience, not her jury. She recognizes the vampiric fascination society has with suffering, particularly the suffering of brilliant women, and instead of shrinking from their gaze, she charges admission. You who have felt the pressure to package your pain into palatable stories, to demonstrate resilience and growth for employers, family, the ruthless algorithms of social media will understand this theatrical defiance. But there is something more radical happening in Lady Lazarus's final transformation. She refuses to remain grateful for her rescue, polite about her survival. I rise with my red hair, she declares, and I eat men like air. The victim becomes predator, the consumed becomes consumer. This is the voice of someone who has been burned down to the bone and rebuilt herself from flame, not innocent, but powerful in a way the untouched can never comprehend. Consider the staggering statistical reality of your own endurance. You have survived 100% of your worst days. Every morning you couldn't imagine facing, you faced. Every loss you thought would annihilate you, you absorbed and continued breathing. This is not toxic positivity, but mathematical fact. You are, whether you feel it or not, an expert at resurrection. Tonight, we reframe this cycle of death and rebirth not as tragedy, but as the fundamental rhythm of existence. Sleep itself is the nightly rehearsal for death, the small surrender of consciousness that trusts in morning's return. You lie down, carrying today's weight, its failures, exhaustions, small humiliations. Let them burn away in darkness. You are Lady Lazarus, stepping willingly into the transformative fire, shedding the skin of today like old paper. The identity you wore for the last 16 hours dissolves. It has served its purpose and is finished. Trust in the automatic nature of resurrection. You do not need to orchestrate tomorrow's rising. It happens without your effort. Your only task now is surrender, allowing the night's alchemy to work in silence. The crowd disperses, the theatre empties, the performance ends. In this blessed interval between death and rebirth, there is only deep restorative peace. Rest now, Phoenix. The flames have done their work. In April 1961, Sylvia Plath lay in a sterile hospital bed, recovering from an appendectomy that had carved away more than diseased tissue. It had temporarily excised her from the relentless performance of being Sylvia Plath. The room was white, blessedly white, white walls that asked nothing, white sheets that demanded no response, white silence that finally matched the exhaustion in her bones. For the first time in years, she existed without expectation. She was not poet, mother, wife, or genius, merely a body healing in clean linen, anonymous as snow. I am learning peacefulness, she wrote, lying by myself quietly. In this sanctuary of nothingness, she had discovered the profound mercy of being nobody. Then someone brought tulips. Bright, aggressive, impossibly red tulips that shattered her white tranquility like stones through glass. The tulips are too excitable, she wrote. And you who live perpetually overstimulated will understand this visceral recoil. These flowers, meant as kindness, became violent intrusions in her carefully constructed emptiness. Their redness talked to her wounds, their presence ate her oxygen, their vivid insistence on life felt like accusation when all she wanted was the neutral peace of winter. The tulips were not merely flowers, they were every notification lighting up your phone at 3 a.m, every cheerful message demanding response when you lack energy to construct acceptable answers, every well-meaning friend insisting you get out more when your soul is begging for retreat. You may know this particular exhaustion intimately, when even beauty becomes burden, when gifts feel like obligations, when the world's cheerfulness arrives as indictment that you are not grateful enough, engaged enough, alive enough. In our hyper-connected age, attention has become the most ruthlessly extracted resource. We are constantly summoned by the red dots of digital tulips, urgent emails, breaking news, the performative happiness of others bleeding through screens. Like Plath's flowers, these demands often disguise themselves as opportunities or connections, yet they consume the quiet space necessary for consciousness to regenerate. The genius of her poem lies in its refusal to apologize for wanting emptiness. She does not pretend gratitude for the gesture or manufacture appreciation for their beauty. She simply tells the forbidden truth. I didn't want any flowers. I only wanted to lie with my hands turned up and be utterly empty. This is not depression speaking, but exhaustion with the constant demand to be a person, to have preferences and reactions, to participate in the theatre of living when the actor is profoundly depleted. Even love can feel like hooks when you are drowning. The family photograph on her bedside table becomes smiling hooks, reminders of roles she must perform even from a hospital bed. Modern psychology validates what Plath intuited: kindness without comprehension can feel like cruelty. Your nervous system, evolved for ancient dangers, was never designed for the relentless input of contemporary existence. Sometimes the mind simply overloads, and the only merciful response is strategic numbness. The white room where nothing watches, nothing demands, nothing insists on your participation. To be nobody is not an insult, but a liberation, freedom from the exhausting burden of being somebody. Tonight, we remove the tulips from your space. Visualize those bright, demanding shapes fading to grey, dissolving into mist. The notifications cease their blooming. The smiling hooks turn face down. The world stops knocking. You are entering the white room now, not cold but cool and clean, like fresh sheets against tired skin. Here you have no name, no history to explain, no future to secure. The air is still, the light diffuse, casting no sharp shadows. Your only task is the involuntary rhythm of breath. Inhale and the white walls expand, exhale and the silence deepens. You are safe from the tulips, safe from their noise, entirely sufficient in your colourless, blessed stillness. In the secret laboratory of her consciousness, Sylvia Plath discovered the most ancient of magics. Suffering, when subjected to the precise heat of language, could be transmuted from poison into medicine. She approached her own agony not as helpless victim, but as methodical alchemist, descending into the darkest minds of her psyche to extract something luminous from the crushing weight. "The blood jet is poetry," she wrote. "There is no stopping it." This was not mere confession but transformation, the raw ore of experience refined into indestructible art that would comfort strangers decades after her death. You who write in margins during sleepless hours, who compose unsent letters to those who wounded you, who type desperate thoughts into phone notes at 4 a.m, you practice this same sacred chemistry. The act of articulation begins the process of mastery. When pain remains wordless, it moves through you like a shapeless ghost. infinite, and omnipresent. But when you pin it to the page with ruthless precision, when you say exactly what hurts and how and why, the suffering acquires edges. You can walk around it, examine it from angles, and most crucially, you can set it down. Plath's method was devastatingly exact. She did not indulge in vague melancholy, but wrote with surgical specificity. Electroshock therapy became a blue volt of voltage. Her father's death left her tongue stuck in a barbed wire snare. Modern expressive writing therapy validates what she intuited. When trauma moves from the amygdala's alarm center to Broca's language center, cortisol levels measurably decrease, immune function improves, and the hippocampus can finally file experience as past rather than perpetual present. She weaponized this healing mechanism, turning her most humiliating moments into monuments of understanding. Yet we must not romanticize this process. The cost was exorbitant. Plath mined her nervous system until the tunnels collapsed, worked herself like a brutal foreman, demanding ever deeper excavations. The alchemy of pain is real, but not infinite. You cannot endlessly transmute suffering without eventually hitting bedrock. Still, she left us profound wisdom. Your pain acquires meaning when it can be shared. When your specific darkness illuminates someone else's identical struggle. By diving deeper into her particular hell, her specific father, kitchen, bees, she struck the bedrock of universal human experience. The more precisely she named her wounds, the more she spoke for everyone who has grieved, cooked dinner while weeping, felt betrayal's sting. Your struggles, which feel like solitary confinement, connect you to this vast network of shared suffering transformed into shared solace. Tonight, we offer you this alchemy not as demand to create masterpieces, but as method of release. As you lie here, imagine your worries not as vague clouds, but as solid objects you can examine. Give them names, shapes, textures. This anxiety is a grey stone pressing my chest. This regret is a rusted key that no longer fits any lock. By naming them precisely, you separate them from your essential self. You are not the stone, you are the hand that can set it down. Visualize a crucible glowing softly in your mind's center. Place these named sorrows into it one by one. Watch as the gentle heat of your attention melts them down, stripping away their power to wound, leaving only neutral energy that can be absorbed harmlessly or released completely. The pain has been witnessed, articulated, honored. It no longer needs to scream for attention because you have truly listened. The laboratory grows quiet now, the crucible cools, the alchemist's work is complete. Your suffering has been transformed from chaos into understanding, from private torment into quiet wisdom. The lead of anguish has become the gold of compassion, for yourself, for others who walk similar paths. Rest now, knowing your pain has served its purpose, and can mercifully, be set aside. On February 25, 1956, in a Cambridge room thick with cigarette smoke and literary ambition, Sylvia Plath encountered Ted Hughes across a crowded party. And the collision was not gentle meeting, but cosmic impact. Two weather systems converging with the inevitability of natural disaster. She bit his cheek that first night, drawing blood, marking him like territory claimed, initiating him into her particular intensity. He responded not with retreat, but with recognition, this hulking Yorkshire giant who carried himself like carved stone. Here, finally, was someone whose voltage matched her own, whose mind moved through language with the same predatory intelligence. You who have experienced the intoxication of being truly seen will understand the euphoria that followed. For someone like Sylvia, who had performed normalcy like an exhausting second language. Ted represented the possibility of profound rest, not the rest of silence, but the deeper rest of being known completely and still chosen. Their early letters crackle with erotic and intellectual charge indistinguishable from each other. They critiqued poems with ruthless precision, pushed each other toward greater artistic risk, celebrated publications as shared victories. This was recognition between equals, two meteors caught in the same gravitational field, each altering the other's orbit in ways both magnificent and dangerous. They married 4 months later with no guests, only witnesses, a detail capturing both the urgency and isolation of their union. In those early years, they built a world of two, writing at opposite ends of the same table, existing in that rare atmosphere where ambition and intimacy breathe identical air. For Sylvia, this felt like arriving home after decades of homesickness. She had found her intellectual twin, her worthy opponent, her perfect mirror. But mirrors, when turned at certain angles, can blind. As Ted's career ascended with meteoric speed, major prizes, packed readings, critical acclaim, Sylvia found herself increasingly introduced as Ted Hughes's wife rather than poet in her own right. The woman who had collected scholarship since childhood now stood in her husband's shadow, applauding his genius while her manuscripts accumulated rejections. The mirror that once reflected her brilliance back to her now seemed to absorb all available light, leaving her in comparative darkness. You who navigate relationships in an age of dual careers and competing ambitions will recognize this tension. Modern psychology speaks of attachment theory, the way early wounds, like Sylvia's father's abandonment through death, reappear in adult relationships with different actors but identical emotional scripts. Can two brilliant people coexist without one dimming their light? The answer Plath discovered is uncomfortable. Love does not automatically transcend ego, and partnership can become competition wearing intimacy's mask. When Ted's infidelity with Asher Wevel shattered their marriage in 1962, it was not merely betrayal but existential annihilation. He had been her witness, her validator, the one who confirmed her reality. The pain of infidelity is devastatingly specific. It rewrites history, turning shared memories into lies, making the intimacy you trusted feel like dangerous delusion. You may know this disorientation, the vertigo of realizing the person who knew you best has become a stranger who knows your secrets. Yet even in devastation, Sylvia extracted terrible wisdom. We cannot build our sense of self entirely on another's recognition, no matter how profound that recognition feels. The mirror must eventually be turned inward. Tonight, we release you from the need for external validation. As sleep approaches, imagine the mirrors in your life, all those whose approval you seek, whose recognition you crave, slowly fading to mist. The battlefield grows distant, the competitions end. You exist independently of anyone's perception, complete within your own skin, requiring no witness to confirm your reality. In darkness, there are no reflections to maintain, no performances to sustain. You are simply here, breathing, sufficient unto yourself, worthy even in solitude. Picture, if you will, America in the 1950s painted entirely in soft pastels. A carefully decorated prison where the bars were made of starched aprons and the locks were fashioned from lipstick tubes. In this suffocating landscape of gleaming appliances and radiant housewives, where happiness was sold through vacuum cleaners and fulfillment promised through perfect casseroles, Sylvia Plath found herself trapped in an impossible performance. The advertisements whispered their seductive lies. Intelligence was charming only when decorative. Ambition was acceptable only when it served the household. And a woman's proper cosmos was contained entirely within kitchen walls and nursery corners. For a mind like Sylvia's, razor-sharp, furiously ambitious, hungry for raw experience, this cultural script was not merely limiting, but lethal. She was a falcon, forced to behave like a parakeet, daily clipping her own wings to fit inside the gilded cage of acceptable femininity. Her journals from this period read like documents of exquisite torture, revealing the schizophrenic split she attempted to maintain. The perfect Smith college girl who wore appropriate lipstick and dated suitable men, and beneath that performance, the feral poet who wanted to devour literature, who felt murderous rage at every limitation, who recognized her own genius and resented every force conspiring to diminish it. You who contort yourself into acceptable shapes, who have learned to soften your competence so others feel comfortable, who exhaust yourself performing palatable versions of your authentic self, you inherit Sylvia's particular crucifixion. The double bind she faced was devastatingly precise. If she pursued writing with the single-minded devotion it demanded, she was selfish, unwomanly, failing at the sacred duty of femininity. If she surrendered to domesticity, her mind would atrophy like an unused muscle. Her talent would wither, and she would join the ranks of suburban mothers she observed pushing strollers with eyes emptied of everything except exhaustion and quiet desperation. The modern world has simply dressed this cage in contemporary language. The pressure to have it all, career, family, wellness, social media presence, optimized for inspiration, is merely the bell jar wearing new glass. Today's woman still faces the impossible expectation to be professionally ambitious but not threateningly so, intellectually capable but not intimidatingly brilliant, successful but still primarily devoted to others' emotional needs. You know this exhaustion intimately, the constant code switching between professional competence and nurturing warmth, the vigilant monitoring of your tone lest you be labeled difficult, the immense invisible labor of making others comfortable at the expense of your own authenticity. Plath's fury at these constraints burns through her poetry like acid eating through delicate fabric. In The Applicant, she reduces the marriage market to grotesque sales pitch. It can sew, it can cook, it can talk, transforming women into functional appliances. In Lady Lazarus, she becomes a phoenix specifically to spite those who wanted her small and manageable. In Ariel, she achieves pure motion, shedding the costumes of acceptable femininity like unnecessary clothing until she is nothing but speed and direction, finally free of the exhausting performance. Yet even her genius had to negotiate with domesticity. Her final poems, those luminous Ariel pieces that secured her literary immortality, were written in stolen hours between 4 and 8 in the morning, before her children woke and maternal duty resumed. Even in her most transcendent moments, she was writing in the margins of motherhood. Her brilliance squeezed into the only hours she could claim as entirely her own. Tonight, we acknowledge the weight you carry, these impossible expectations, these contradictory demands. This bone-deep exhaustion of performing acceptability while your authentic self suffocates behind carefully maintained masks. As darkness deepens around you, imagine removing these costumes one by one, the professional persona that never shows fatigue, the dutiful daughter who never disappoints, the agreeable friend who never has inconvenient needs, the person who makes everyone comfortable while your own truth withers. From neglect, the cage door swings open in this blessed darkness. You are released from the tyranny of others' comfort, free from the relentless theatre of gender performance. In sleep, you need not be nurturing, pleasant, or appropriately ambitious. You can lay down the heavy burden of being palatable and simply exist, difficult, complex, contradictory, entirely yourself. The audience has gone home, the stage lights are extinguished, and there is no one left requiring your performance. Rest now, magnificent and unedited, gloriously free. On a cold October night in 1961, Sylvia Plath stood at the window of a Devon rectory, gazing across the ancient churchyard where a solitary yew tree stood like a dark sentinel against the crystalline sky. The moon hung low and remote, casting its pale light over weathered gravestones that leaned at tired angles, each marking a life once consumed by worries, now returned to silence. From this stark landscape emerged one of her most philosophically profound poems, a meditation that strips away comforting illusions to reveal something unexpectedly liberating. This is the light of the mind, cold and planetary. The poem begins with brutal honesty about cosmic indifference. The moon is no door, she declares, refusing the romantic notion that celestial bodies offer passage to meaning or salvation. Instead, the moon is a face in its own right, white as a knuckle and terribly upset, not upset about human suffering, but simply existing in its own alien distress, utterly separate from our earthbound concerns. The yew tree, ancient witness to centuries of human drama, offers neither comfort nor accusation. It simply stands, gothic and enduring, pointing toward a sky that watches everything and cares about nothing. You who lie awake scrolling through the endless catalogue of your mistakes, rehearsing tomorrow's conversations with anxious precision, may initially recoil from this cosmic coldness. We are trained to seek meaning, to believe our struggles matter to some watching universe, to imagine our pain echoes in celestial chambers. But consider the profound relief embedded in Plath's revelation. The stars are not keeping score of your embarrassments. The moon does not judge your failed relationships or unfinished projects. Your internal critic behaves like a cruel little god, but the actual cosmos operates with magnificent indifference to your performance. Modern psychology calls this shift decentering, stepping out of the cramped theatre of personal drama into the vast, cool lobby of perspective. You inherit a culture that inflates every moment into crisis, every misstep into identity-defining catastrophe. Social media has trained you to believe your life is perpetual performance under constant scrutiny, that every awkward moment is permanently archived in some cosmic database of judgment. But the ancient yew tree in Plath's churchyard has witnessed births, deaths, love affairs, and heartbreaks across centuries, remaining utterly unmoved by any of them. Tonight, we invite you to adopt this lunar perspective. Imagine rising above your bed, through the ceiling, above your city, until you can see the curve of Earth below. From this height, your current anxieties become invisible specks in the general hum of 8 billion human concerns. The email you forgot to send, the conversation you replay in shame, the future that refuses to arrange itself, all dissolve into the vast, silent machinery of the cosmos. This is not minimization of your pain, but liberation from the tyranny of self-importance. The moon continues its ancient orbit, asking nothing of you. It has illuminated the worries of emperors and peasants with identical dispassion, watched civilizations rise and crumble without blinking. In geological time, your entire lifespan is less than a heartbeat, your current suffering a brief flicker already passing. There is strange mercy in this cosmic coldness, permission to stop treating your struggles as universe-shaking catastrophes. Let this indifference wrap around you like a blanket. The yew tree points silently toward infinity, connecting earth to emptiness, rooting you in something older than your grief. You are held in this vast, uncaring, beautiful dark, not coldly, but coolly, the way stone holds heat, the way darkness holds light. The pressure to matter, to perform, to justify your existence, let it all dissolve under the moon's neutral gaze. You are safe here, small and sufficient, requiring no cosmic validation. The universe is spacious enough to hold everything you are without breaking. Sleep now, blessed and ignored, under the watching, wordless moon. In the frozen depths of February 1963, as London endured its coldest winter in 2 centuries and Sylvia Plath's world contracted to the narrow confines of a flat on Fitzroy Road, something extraordinary and terrible was happening in the pre-dawn darkness. She woke at 4 in the morning, that sacred liminal hour when the veil between consciousness and dream grows gossamer thin, and wrote with a fury that seemed less like inspiration than possession. The poems arrived like messages from a burning building, each one carrying urgent news from the front lines of psychological war. "I am writing the best poems of my life," she told her mother with prophetic accuracy. "They will make my name." This was not gentle creativity, but something closer to creative combustion. In those final months, as her marriage collapsed and isolation closed around her like ice, Plath entered a state of artistic productivity so intense it seemed to burn through the very fabric of ordinary time. One poem, sometimes 2, emerged fully formed before her children stirred. Lady Lazarus, Daddy, Ariel, Edge. Each title reads like a station on a dark pilgrimage. Each poem vibrating with concentrated voltage that seems to leap from the page decades later. You who have experienced breakthrough during breakdown, who have discovered strange clarity in the eye of your personal hurricane, will recognize this paradoxical phenomenon. When the structures of ordinary life collapse, when there is nothing left to lose and no performance left to maintain, sometimes the truest voice finally speaks. Modern neuroscience offers partial explanation for what Plath experienced. Certain states of psychological crisis can temporarily enhance creative output by accelerating thought processes, sharpening associations, and removing the internal censors that normally constrain expression. There exists a narrow but potent band where emotional activation enhances creativity, moderate stress increases salience and associative thinking, allowing unexpected connections to form with unusual speed. The same neurochemistry that produces suffering can, under specific conditions, generate astonishing productivity. Ideas connect without hesitation. Language flows unimpeded. And the gap between thought and expression narrows to nothing. For those brief, incandescent weeks, Sylvia existed in this heightened state, her blood jet of poetry fueled by the terrible urgency of a mind sensing its own approaching silence. But we must approach this phenomenon with both reverence and caution, for there is a dangerous myth embedded here, the seductive lie that genius requires suffering, that without anguish the creative well runs dry. This is not merely false, but lethal. Plath's despair may have thinned the membrane between her conscious mind and its buried images, but it also eroded the very structures that could have sustained her life. She was not choosing this intensity, but being consumed by it, not thriving but surviving, extracting poetry from her nervous system the way a desperate miner strips the last ore from a collapsing shaft. You who have pulled all-nighters fueled by anxiety, who have achieved your best work while simultaneously falling apart. Understand this unsustainable alchemy. Yes, crisis can temporarily sharpen focus, stripping away the trivial to reveal what truly matters. Yes, when defenses shatter, raw material surfaces that polite consciousness normally keeps buried. But this is extraction, not cultivation. A method that works until suddenly, catastrophically, it doesn't. What makes Plath's final poems enduring is not merely the extremity of her feeling, but the cold, disciplined intelligence shaping each line. Suffering provided raw material, craft provided form. Without that formal rigor, her anguish would have remained inarticulate noise. The deepest lesson of Plath's life is both sober and liberating. Creativity does not require your ruin. It needs your aliveness, your ongoingness, the simple fact that you remain available to tomorrow. Yes, your wounds give you a particular way of seeing. Your disappointments carve channels through which certain images flow with more force. But it is rest, unremarkable, undramatic rest, that allows those images to gather, to settle, to arrange themselves into patterns your waking mind can later translate into words, decisions, or quiet acts of courage. Tonight we acknowledge both truths. Your darkest hours have sometimes birthed your truest insights, and you are not required to suffer continuously to remain creative or authentic. The ore, once mined, does not need the mine to remain open. As you sink towards sleep, imagine closing the mine shaft gently but firmly. The valuable material has been extracted, the dangerous excavation can cease. Think of this moment as the fertile darkness of soil in winter. Nothing appears to be happening on the surface. The ground is hard, cold, silent. Yet beneath, in the protective dark, essential work is being done. Roots are deepening. Energy is gathering. Your current exhaustion, your confusion, your quiet sadness, these are not wasted time. They are the compost from which new understanding will eventually grow. You do not need to force the bloom tonight, do not need to write the masterpiece or solve the problem. Trust the fertility of the dark, but not the destruction it sometimes demands. Let the soil of your mind rest, nurturing the seeds of tomorrow's wisdom in blessed, restorative silence. In the grey hours before dawn on April 1st, 1960, Sylvia Plath gave birth to her daughter Frida, and the universe rearranged itself around this new gravitational center, small, demanding, utterly transformative. She had approached motherhood with the same fierce intellectual curiosity she brought to everything else, imagining herself as the perfect synthesis of creative genius and nurturing mother, as if these identities were naturally complementary rather than frequently at war. What she discovered instead was love's most beautiful and terrible complication. You can adore someone so completely that your existence becomes simultaneously more meaningful and more constrained. As if a door to profound purpose had opened while another door to autonomous selfhood quietly sealed. Behind you, you who carry the weight of caring for others, children, aging parents, partners who need more than you sometimes have to give, will recognize this double existence immediately. There is the you who shows up each day, tends wounds, anticipates needs, performs the endless choreography of care. And there is the you who watches from somewhere deep inside, asking the forbidden question, where did I go? This is not selfishness speaking, but the basic human need for continuity of self. The requirement that some essential core remain intact even as love reshapes everything around it. Plath's poems about pregnancy and motherhood refuse the sanitized version our culture demands. In Morning Song, she describes her newborn with tender precision. Love set you going like a fat gold watch, yet also observes with unsettling honesty, I'm no more your mother than the cloud that distills a mirror to reflect its own slow effacement. Here is the brutal poetry of maternal transformation. The cloud creates the puddle, the mirror that reflects the world, but vanishes in the process of creation. You may know this sensation of effacement intimately, the feeling that your identity is slowly evaporating under the heat of others' needs, your name replaced by your function, mother, caretaker, source, the one who always has answers. In an era that worshipped domestic sacrifice, when women's magazines painted motherhood as pure fulfillment, Plath dared to record the emotions that accompanied genuine caregiving: resentment alongside devotion, boredom threaded through tenderness, grief for the self who could think without interruption, or write without listening for a cry. When her son Nicholas arrived in January 1962, just as her marriage was collapsing, she found herself managing 2 small children while her own world crumbled. Another mouth to feed, another consciousness requiring her diminished resources, another love that complicated rather than simplified her. Relationship with existence. The modern understanding of maternal mental health finally offers language for what Plath experienced in isolation. We now recognize postpartum depression, parental burnout, the neurobiological reality that caregiving can deplete the nervous system beyond its capacity to regenerate. The brain undergoes massive restructuring during parenthood. Identity shifts like tectonic plates finding new positions. To feel simultaneously devoted and trapped, fulfilled and erased, means you are experiencing the full spectrum of attachment rather than the Instagram-worthy version our culture promotes. Yet Plath's love for Frida and Nicholas was not performance, but genuine, fierce, protective, and this made everything more complicated, not less. Every hour spent writing was stolen from children who needed her presence. Every hour devoted to them was time her work languished, her ambitions deferred into an increasingly uncertain future. There was no solution to this equation, no amount of efficiency or self-sacrifice that could make the mathematics work. She was being asked to pour endlessly from a vessel that was never allowed to refill. The ethics of motherhood become particularly agonizing when you are simultaneously trying to mother yourself, to protect your own creativity, honor your own need for solitude, maintain some thread of connection to the person you were before love rearranged your entire existence. This is not narcissism but survival, the recognition that complete self-erasure serves no one, least of all the children who need a whole person as their guide rather than a hollow shell performing devotion. Her final act reveals this complexity in its most heartbreaking form. Before opening the gas oven that February morning, Sylvia placed bread and milk beside her sleeping children's beds, ensuring they would wake to nourishment. She opened their bedroom window for fresh air, then sealed the kitchen door with towels and tape to protect them from the method of her departure. Even in the grip of suicidal despair, maternal instinct operated with devastating precision. She was trying to remove herself, the source of pain as she saw it, while preserving them. This is not noble, but tragic. The terrible logic of depression when entangled with love. The belief that your absence might be kindness, that your pain is contagion from which others must be shielded. You who worry that your anxiety burdens your family, who feel guilty for needing space, who sometimes fantasize about disappearing just to stop being a problem, you are walking the edge of this same distorted reasoning. It feels like ethical thinking when the mind is exhausted, but it is a lie depression tells when resources are depleted beyond recognition. Tonight, we offer gentle absolution for your ambivalence. The tribunal that sits in permanent session, judging your every moment of impatience or desire for escape, can finally adjourn. It is not only permissible, but human to love your children, your parents, your partner, and still crave solitude. Your exhaustion does not cancel your devotion, your need for rest does not make you selfish. Ambivalence is not the opposite of love, but often its deepest, most honest expression. As darkness deepens around you, imagine the complex knot of obligation loosening in your chest. The guilt that whispers you are not doing enough, loving enough, sacrificing enough, let it unravel like a sweater coming undone. You are not a cloud required to efface yourself for others' reflection. You are a solid, separate being who deserves rest not because you have earned it through service, but because you exist. The children are asleep now. The house has grown quiet. The endless demands of caregiving have paused for these few sacred hours. You are released from the role of protector, nurturer, source of all solutions. For this brief time, you need not sustain anyone else's life. You can simply tend to your own, breathing in the quiet air, allowing yourself to be the child held by the night, cared for by the silence, absolved of all responsibility except the gentle, necessary work of rest now, complicated and human, perfectly imperfect in your ambivalence. Worthy of peace, not despite your struggles, but because of your tender, exhausted humanity. In her poem Mirror, Sylvia Plath gives voice to an object that hangs in every home, yet carries the weight of existential truth, that rectangular portal of silver and glass that reflects not just image, but the entire architecture of self-perception. I am silver and exact. The mirror declares with crystalline precision, I have no preconceptions. Whatever I see I swallow immediately, just as it is, unmisted by love or dislike. Here is an entity performing the rarest of functions, witnessing without judgment, reflecting without commentary, showing what is rather than what should be. You who pause before mirrors with that familiar mixture of scrutiny and disappointment, cataloguing flaws with prosecutorial precision, may initially resist the mirror's radical neutrality. We are trained to view our reflection as evidence in an ongoing trial where we stand perpetually accused of insufficient beauty, inadequate presentation, failure to meet standards set by algorithms and advertisements. The mirror becomes courtroom, and we are both defendant and merciless judge, examining each angle for proof of unworthiness. But Plath's mirror offers something revolutionary, pure observation, stripped of interpretation. I am not cruel, only truthful, the mirror insists, and this distinction cuts to the heart of your suffering. Cruelty requires intention, the desire to wound. Truth is simply what is, presented without embellishment or malice. Your bathroom mirror, the front-facing camera that follows you into your palm and pocket. The unexpected reflection in a shop window. These have multiplied exponentially in our digital age, creating an endless hall of potential judgment. Yet each one, like Plath's mirror, simply shows this particular moment in time, carrying no agenda beyond reflection. The poem's devastating second movement introduces the woman who has drowned a young girl in the mirror's depths, watching as an old woman rises toward her day after day, like a terrible fish. This image captures the particular grief of aging in a culture obsessed with youth, the slow, inexorable transformation that the mirror documents without sentiment. For someone like Plath, whose beauty had been currency and whose youth felt like armor against irrelevance. This daily confrontation with mortality must have felt like slow drowning indeed. You who notice new lines appearing, grey hairs multiplying, the subtle softening and settling that marks time's passage, inherit this same complex relationship with your changing reflection. But tonight we reclaim the mirror's neutrality as liberation rather than condemnation. Imagine adopting the mirror's perspective, that silver and exact gaze that swallows everything immediately without the exhausting overlay of judgment. When you think I am lazy, the mirror would simply reflect the body is resting. When you think I am a failure, the mirror would reflect a person who tried something that did not work. The mirror does not add adjectives, does not tell stories, does not predict doom. It only shows what is, right now, without the emotional commentary that transforms observation into suffering. This practice of unmisted seeing is profound mindfulness, allowing you to separate the raw data of your existence from the painful narratives you construct around it. The mirror swallows everything immediately: joy, sorrow, youth, age, without preference. It does not cling to the image of you from 10 years ago, nor does it anxiously anticipate the image of you 10 years hence. It exists only in the absolute present, offering the radical acceptance your inner critic has never learned to provide. As you lie here in merciful darkness, you are released from the tyranny of the visual altogether. There are no mirrors in sleep, no reflections to critique or improve. Your face relaxes into its natural arrangement, freed from the constant micro-adjustments of social presentation. The muscles that hold your expression in acceptable configurations finally release. Without anyone watching, including yourself, your face becomes simply what it is: skin and bone and the soft machinery of being human. Let this formlessness wash over you now. In the dark, you have no age, no flaws requiring correction, no appearance demanding maintenance. You are consciousness without container, awareness without the burden of embodiment. The terrible fish of aging swims in distant waters, the drowned girl rests in peaceful depths. Neither past nor future versions of yourself require your attention in this blessed interval. Become the mirror for your own mind now, observing thoughts as they drift by like clouds across glass, swallowing them immediately without judgment. Thinking is happening. Worry is present. Sadness is moving through. Let each mental movement pass without resistance or attachment, reflecting it neutrally before it dissolves into the vast, accepting darkness. The mirror has closed its eye, the reflection has dissolved. There is only you, formless in the dark, beyond judgment, beyond comparison, simply existing in the vast, accepting silence. Rest now, unseen and therefore unburdened, freed from the exhausting labor of being looked at, silver and exact in your perfect, unmeasured peace. On February 5, 1963, just 6 days before her death, Sylvia Plath wrote Edge, a poem of such chilling finality it reads like a closing statement delivered to the universe itself. The woman is perfected, she begins, and the word lands with the weight of marble hitting earth. For decades, scholars have read this as suicide note, as grim celebration of self-destruction. But tonight we approach it differently, not as morbid fascination with ending, but as profound meditation on the necessity of completion, the dignity of stopping, and the absolute peace found only at the very edge of effort. You who live in a culture that worships endless productivity, perpetual growth, and constant forward motion, may find the concept of perfection through stopping deeply alien yet strangely seductive. We are taught that rest must be earned, that completion is failure, that the only acceptable direction is relentless advancement. But Edge offers a counter-narrative. There is grace in closure, beauty in the rolled scroll, wisdom in the recognition that some stories reach their natural terminus not through tragedy, but through the simple, inevitable fact that everything living requires cycles of expansion and contraction. Plath describes her figure wearing the smile of accomplishment. And here we discover the poem's radical reframing of perfection. This is not the perfection of flawless performance or impossible standards, but the perfection of completion. The scroll rolled up, the day's work finished, the pitcher emptied of all it had to give. You who feel exhausted by unfinished tasks and endless obligations, who apologize for your limits and try to squeeze one more drop of energy for others, can find profound permission in this imagery. The pitcher must be empty before it can be refilled. The rose must close its petals when the garden stiffens with night's approach. She has folded them back into her body as petals of a rose close when the garden stiffens and odors bleed from the sweet, deep throats of the night flower. Here is nature's own instruction manual for rest. The rose does not apologize for closing at dusk. It simply follows the ancient wisdom written into its biology. When light fades and temperature drops, petals fold inward, not from weakness, but from profound intelligence, protecting the delicate center until conditions favor opening again. You are not required to remain perpetually available, endlessly blooming for every passing demand. There is a time for display and a time for the protective closing, the drawing inward that allows tomorrow's flowering. The poem's children are described as white serpents who have folded back into her body, each at each little pitcher of milk, now empty. This disturbing image, when stripped of its literal implications, offers powerful metaphorical peace. Your responsibilities, your creations, your worries, they fold back into the source at night. They cease to be separate entities demanding your attention and return to the quiet unity of your being. The milk is gone, the giving is over. You have poured yourself out completely, and now the vessels are allowed to be empty, clean, ready for tomorrow's filling. The moon looks down with complete indifference, used to this sort of thing. Her blacks crackle and drag. This ancient witness has observed the nightly death and resurrection across millennia, civilizations rising and falling, individual humans spending themselves and renewing, the endless cycle of exhaustion and restoration. Your particular fatigue is not unique or shameful, but simply another instance of the universal rhythm the moon has watched since before language existed to name it. Tonight you stand at your own edge, not a precipice but a boundary, the natural limit of what one human consciousness can accomplish between sunrise and sunset. Visualize yourself as that perfected figure, not dead, but deeply, completely still. Feel your struggles folding back into your body like rose petals drawing closed. The anxiety about tomorrow, the regret about yesterday, the general background hum of inadequacy. Each one a petal closing, protecting your tender center from the stiffening garden of night. The scroll of your day is rolling up now, slowly, reverently. until the final edge meets itself. There is nothing more to write on this page. The marble stillness spreads through your limbs. Your breath moves with the slow, inevitable rhythm of the eternal moon, which has nothing to be sad about. You have reached the edge of consciousness and found it beautiful. The woman is perfected. The day is complete. Rest now in the accomplishment of your stillness. Franz Kafka wrote that a book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us, and Sylvia Plath sees this metaphor like a sacred instruction. Her poems were precisely that, axes swung with exquisite control at the ice that locked her inner world in silence. Yet tonight, as we approach the threshold of sleep, we complete the transformation she began, turning language from instrument of interrogation into the gentlest salve for your exhausted consciousness. The same words that shatter can also soothe. The blade that splits frozen seas creates channels for healing waters to flow. You who live perpetually narrated, whose mind provides relentless commentary on every gesture and failure, understand how language can become prison guard rather than liberator. Your internal monologue, which should offer companionship, has learned cruelty from a culture that measures worth through performance. It speaks in the harsh grammar of obligation, should, must, never enough, cataloguing inadequacies with prosecutorial precision. Words, which could bridge you to understanding, have become the bars of your own cell, each sentence a verdict in the endless trial you conduct against yourself. But language possesses peculiar alchemy, the same tool that wounds can heal when wielded with different intention. Modern neuroscience confirms what Plath intuited. When you name emotions with precision, the brain's alarm centers quiet while regions of regulation activate. Notice how these sentences land differently in your nervous system. I am a failure versus I attempted something that did not work. The first makes failure your identity, permanent and totalizing. The second makes it an event, temporary and specific. Or, try this transformation, I am anxious becomes anxiety is moving through me. One makes you the problem, the other makes you the spacious container through which weather passes. As you lie here, we begin the gentle deconstruction of language itself, moving from the complex machinery of meaning toward simple elements that require no interpretation. Feel how these words land without demanding analysis. Stone, water, breath, dark. Each one complete, asking nothing, naming what is without insisting you do anything about it. Your brilliant mind, trained for problem-solving, can finally rest from its labors. The time for understanding has passed. The axes are buried in the woodpile, their work complete. Now we move even simpler soft. Still, safe, slow. Single-syllable words require less energy to process, bypassing analytical centers to speak directly to the ancient parts of your brain that only need to know whether you are secure. You are. The door is locked, the blanket is warm, the night holds you with impersonal tenderness. No complex sentences are required to explain this safety, it simply is. Let language become pure sound now, divorced from meaning.
The word peace is just breath released, peace. The word sleep is a sigh, sleep. They are not concepts requiring comprehension, but sonic textures, vibrations dissolving into air. Your relationship to words shifts from interpretation to sensation, from meaning to music. The internal narrator who has provided constant commentary since morning grows quieter, sentences becoming fragments, warm here, safe now, letting go, then fragments becoming single words, quiet, still, rest, sleep. The library of your mind is closing now.
Books are shelving themselves. Lights in the corridors of thought extinguish one by one. The narrative arc of your day has resolved. Sylvia's axes have been transformed. The frozen sea has melted, and what poured out was not more pain but the deep, healing waters of silence. Words have done their work, naming, explaining, connecting, comforting. Now they can be set aside like tools returned to the shed after long labour. There is nothing left requiring articulation, no thought demanding capture and examination. Only the vast, accepting quiet where language dissolves and you remain, wordless and whole, breathing in the blessed space beyond all axes, beyond all cutting, resting in the original silence from which all words emerge and to which, finally, mercifully, they return. Return now, gently, to that London winter of February 1963. But the sharp edges of history have softened into something merciful. The coldest winter in 2 centuries has completed its work, and what remains is only the quiet aftermath, snow falling effectively, silently, covering Fitzroy Road in a blanket so white it erases every boundary between past and present, between Sylvia's story and your own. The narrative that carried you through 15 chapters dissolves now like frost under gentle breath. There is no more analysis required, no more understanding to achieve. The brilliant mind that followed every thread, recognized itself in every poem, can finally rest from its labours. Outside, the snow covers everything with democratic tenderness. It falls on the iron railings where she once walked, on the pavement where taxis hurried through the night, on the windows of strangers who never knew her name. The snow does not ask who lived here, who suffered here, who wrote poems that would outlive empires. It simply falls, patient as eternity, making all surfaces equally white, equally quiet, equally still. Let that same snow begin to fall in the landscape of your mind. Notice your loudest thought, the worry with jagged edges, the regret that returns like an unwelcome guest, the anxiety about tomorrow that pulses with electric insistence. See it clearly for a moment, as if written in dark letters on winter pavement. Now watch as the first thin veil of snow drifts down, landing softly on those letters. More falls, and more. The words blur, their sharp outlines soften, soon you cannot read them at all. They are still there, perhaps, but buried under something older than fear, the universe's ancient impulse to rest. White, silent, soft, falling, your thoughts become less like sentences and more like shapes moving slowly through fog. A memory drifts by, but before you can grasp it, the snow covers it completely. Another thought approaches. Perhaps a conversation to replay, perhaps a problem to solve. But it too disappears under the gentle accumulation. The snow keeps falling, covering the landscape of your consciousness until everything is one continuous white. Quiet, still, peace, deep. Feel the weight of this snow on your awareness now, not heavy but present, accumulating flake by flake. Each one carries away a fragment of the day's burden. Your breathing slows to match the snow's rhythm, the gentle descent, the soft landing, the merging with what came before. There is no separation anymore between your breath and the falling snow, between your body and the quiet dark that holds it. The room around you fades to a single texture of warmth and safety. The boundaries of your physical form grow uncertain, unimportant. You are not the person lying here, but the snow itself, falling through infinite space toward perfect rest. The question of identity dissolves before it fully forms. There is only the white static of approaching sleep, the beautiful erasure of all distinction. Soft, warm, still. Sleep, the snow covers the taxis on Fitzroy Road. The snow covers the decades between then and now. The snow covers your last coherent thoughts, transforming them into something simpler, softer, more like breath than language. Words become textures, the cool smoothness of the pillowcase, the weight of the blanket like accumulated snow. The darkness behind your eyelids becoming the white behind closed curtains. Everything is covered now, the scroll is rolled, the day is buried under gentle white. Your consciousness sinks deeper into the drift, where everything is muffled and safe, where no sound reaches, where no demand can follow. White, sleep, peace, the words themselves disappear, becoming just breath. Just a whisper of snow on snow, silence into silence. The vast, accepting dark holds everything without effort. You are held. You are safe. Sleep. White,